Good morning on this Thursday, April the 8th, 2021. Let it be known, Dr. Lauren Tucker is the founder and CEO of a company called Do What Matters. It's an organization that is fearlessly disrupting cultural, I can't say that word, y'all, homogeneity through her firm's unique brand of inclusion and management. Well, she's going to say that word for us when we have her on this morning. We're going to talk to this amazing entrepreneur this morning. And we will also be joined shortly by our president and CEO, Dr. Ben Chavis. But first, of course, the headlines for this morning. The coronavirus variant first identified in the United Kingdom is now the most common strain of coronavirus in the United States. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention Director Rochelle Walensky said yesterday. And in fact, the program and note, Dr. Walensky is going to join Let It Be Known next week. We'll give you more details on her visit to our program. But she says, based on our most recent estimates from CDC surveillance, the B.1.17 variant is now the most common lineage circulating in the United States. She said at the White House COVID-19 response team briefing that studies show that the UK variant is more contagious than the original strain. It's possibly more dangerous and associated with a higher risk. There are currently 16,275 confirmed cases of the B.1.17 variant in the U.S., according to the CDC. The country's daily rate of new cases rose over most of the last 4 weeks, and part of that is due to the spread of the B.1.17 variant. So again, folks, we the Black Press continues to encourage you to wear your mask, social distance, and take all precautions. And now we'll bring on our president and CEO, Dr. Ben Chavis. Good morning, Dr. Chavis.
Good morning, Stacy. On behalf of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, thank you for keeping us awake, keeping us informed, and keeping us ready to go with today's headlines.
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Chavis. Testimony continues in the Minnesota courtroom today as LAPD Sergeant Jody Steiger, a use of force expert, testified that former police officer Derek Chauvin had an obligation to take into consideration whether George Floyd was in distress when considering to continue the type of force he was applying. Steiger said as the time went on, clearly in the video, you could see that Mr. Floyd's his health was deteriorating. He continued, he said his breath was getting lower and his tone of voice was getting lower and his movements were starting to cease. So as the officer on scene, he said Chauvin had to see that something was not right. He had to see that something had changed drastically to what was occurring earlier. So you have a responsibility to take some action. So more testimony is expected today, in which more police officers are to take the stand. And another note on that testimony yesterday, the video, the defense attorney claimed that George Floyd had shouted out that he was he had taken too many drugs. Well, the video was played again to clarify that. And what George Floyd said on the video was, I did not do any drugs. Vast different than what the defense was trying to paint. So Dr. Chavis, obviously the Minnesota Spokesman Recorder and Insight News, our two affiliates there in Minnesota, will continue to update us on that.
Absolutely. Well, people all over the world, all over across the country, particularly Black Americans, are watching this trial every day. And it's a reminder that, African Americans suffer from systematic racism in the criminal justice system. If there's ever a time there should be a conviction of a police officer for murdering a Black person, it is in this case. The evidence is overwhelmingly showing that George Floyd was murdered. And the jury is going to have to pay attention to the facts as they're laid out. And we're all going to see, but we all have to watch and keep our prayers to make sure that the family of George Floyd receives justice and that George Floyd's memory be kept high as his life was sacrificed. Once again, a long list of sacrifices that all remind us that we have work to do Racism is alive and well in America. Systemic racism is alive and well. And that's why you need the black press, because we have to not only point out these facts, we have to also give reasons why these facts are the way they are. What is the undergirding reality? And it all concludes with systemic racism.
Yeah, and Dr. Chavis, we see many times where the victim is often put on trial. And one of the things that the Floyd family attorney, Benjamin Crump, said at the very beginning, he clarified to the mainstream press, who was classifying this as the George Floyd trial. It's not the George Floyd trial. It's the
That's
Derek
right.
Chauvin trial. And
Yes.
so, we don't, and certainly in the black press, we are not going to put the victim on trial.
Exactly, exactly. Well, Chauvin is on trial, but America is also on trial. I think white supremacy is on trial, racism is on trial, and it's time for our country to take the steps to rid our society of all the various manifestations of systemic racism.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Chavis, some good news this morning. King Randall, a 21-year-old who founded a youth organization called the X for Boys, is opening up a new school in Albany, Georgia, called the New Life Prep School for Boys, that aims to help more young black boys in the community reach their full potential. According to blacknews.com, 2 years ago, Randall was just 19 years old when he started the X for Boys, which provides a safe space for teenage boys aged 11 to 17. The organization has since hosted different workshops on skills such as welding, automotive repair, construction, as well as cooking. They also organize field trips and a book club, which significantly improved the ability of some children who didn't know how to read to an 86% reading comprehension rate. King initially funded the organization's operations solely out of his pocket. Remember, he's just 21, but he started raising money to fund other programs. Ever since he started the organization, he said he really wanted to establish a school. And with the support of the other people in the community, even nationwide, he is making that dream a reality. The New Life Prep School for Boys, which will be located at the former Isabella School, will focus on teaching young men traditional academic trade skills, as well as firearms training and the science of family and manhood. So King Randall, 21 years old, in Albany, Georgia, big ups to him.
Absolutely. And again, he's representative of Generation Z. We're so proud of our young brothers and sisters who are rising to take the lead. And of course, we heard earlier this week from the Children's Defense Fund that the majority of people, for the first time in American history, under 18 are children of color, youth of color. So the browning of America is not something of the future. It's a reality today.
Yeah, a great job again by King Randall. So Dr. Chavis, we have to do what matters, don't we? And this morning, Dr. Lauren Tucker, the founder and CEO of Do What Matters, an organization that is fearlessly working hard for brand inclusion management. Dr. Tucker joins us as my tongue continues to get tied. Dr. Tucker, we welcome you.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Dr. Tucker, welcome. Welcome to the Black Press of America.
Great to be here.
So, Dr. Tucker, tell us about Do What Matters in a nutshell. What is Do What Matters?
Yeah, our goal is really, we're an inclusion management consultancy, and what we do is help culture businesses, whether they're advertising agencies, journalistic organizations, entertainment organizations. We help them create an inclusive culture, a culture that what we call fights cultural homogeneity to create a more innovative, creative organization that drives growth. And so we're really focused on helping them get the right people, doing the right jobs, elevating those relevant differences, whether they're ethnic and cultural differences, gender, as well as different perspectives. All of these elements of difference need to be elevated in order to be more creative, more innovative, and really create work that is memorable, meaningful, and remarkable to an increasingly multicultural and global audience.
Well, yeah, thanks for that explanation, because it seems to encompass a lot of things, but it also, Dr. Tucker, it sounds like there's a lot of different components working here. How do you organize it? How do you strategize it? And how does it ultimately help people?
Well, we really work at the top level at these organizations. So we insist on working with the C-suite and making sure they're committed. Many folks in the C-suite confuse intent with impact. And so we make sure that our connection is directly with the CEO, the COOs, the chief talent officers, and we work with all of them on a weekly basis. If we don't have that kind of commitment, we don't work with them. We have turned away business where they will immediately hand us off to HR. Right now, HR is fairly stressed. They're trying to figure out what they need to do, with oftentimes without the support, without the investment that the C-suite needs to make. And this is particularly true with the chief diversity officers. Not a week goes by that I don't get a reach out from chief diversity officers who are frustrated because they were hired, especially in the advertising industry. They were hired in this wave of folks that were hired, after the George Floyd murder, and they really were hired to really be that transactional, symbolic, intent there. But they've not been given investment. They've not been given people to support them. And it really just ends up being transactional. We're all about transformational change. And as a result, we really insist upon having the commitment of the C-suite. And we oftentimes will talk to the C-suite about not hiring a chief diversity officer, because they should all be committed to integrating inclusion into the entire operation. And oftentimes when you hire a chief diversity officer, then it becomes a bolt-on. It becomes, they shift all the responsibility of making sure that the organization is seen as being diverse, seen as being inclusive, but they give them no authority in terms of financial support and human resource support to actually get things done and to have that impact. So as a result, we don't see sustained action on diversity and sustained action on representation. And as so we're looking at an ad industry, which is really our primary focus right now. We're looking at an ad industry that hasn't changed after 30 some years of promising everyone that they would be more representative. And it's really crucial that this industry take this seriously, because they are creating cultural content that is only 16% of this cultural content that they make is either remembered or correctly attributed to the brands that are sponsoring them. So from a financial standpoint, the marketers that are investing this money are wasting about 84% of their money. That old saying of 50%, I know which 50%, I know 50% is being lost, but I just don't know which 50%. Well, it's more than 50%.
Wow. I want to say good morning to our executive administrator, Claudette Perry. It's always great to have you with us. Michelle Madison, Bobby Henry at the West Side Gazette, Joni King, Annette Phillips, and James Wright of the Washington Informer. He says C-suites are where cultural changes at workplaces need to take place. C-suites set the pace. Dr. Chavis, I'm going to toss it over to you. I know you want to get in on this conversation.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tucker. Dr. Tucker, tell us, where are you based? Where's your organization?
Chicago. We're in Chicago, but we have consultants in a variety of different cities, and so we're all over the place. We were that way before COVID.
Yes, the reason why I asked that, because Chicago at one point used to be the center of the advertising world. Now it's shifted to New York. But the question is, I have two questions. Number one, should not the C-suite itself be diverse and inclusive? I think from an advertising perspective, we know we represent the black press. We don't get the advertising dollars because the advertising, well, first the clients have to demand it, but then the advertising agencies, every time that we interface with them, predominantly don't have people of color in decision making in the C-suite of the advertising agency itself. So you got a company that is talks diversity but doesn't practice it, because if you look at the people who make the decisions, they're not primarily people of color. So that's one thing. Can you speak about the importance of having diversity and inclusion in the C-suite itself?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. There should not only be diversity in the C-suite, but diversity on the boards that are managing many of these holding companies and large agencies. Now, many of the agencies are small agencies. They're independently owned. They're small, still dominated by white male leadership. And it is incumbent, here's where the rubber hits the road. It is incumbent upon the marketers, the people who are investing their money with advertising agencies, to start restructuring the way that they seek advertising agencies. The RFPs, the request for proposals, the agency reviews, having an inclusive C-suite should be a point of whether they decide to go with that agency or not, whether that agency should even be considered in the review. So what I continue to emphasize is that marketers have the power here to change the dynamic, because the agencies are making decisions about where to allocate those advertising dollars in terms of the kinds of media that they're using. But at the end of the day, what agencies do, very much influenced by what marketers are willing to pay for and where they're willing to put their money. And so this is a larger issue than just the advertising industry. The advertising industry would change if marketers started to make inclusion management a major criteria for choosing an advertising agency. And you can see the impact, because they have already influenced agencies to start reflecting more diversity in the actual advertising itself. So we know that this is really important. We also know that when companies like McDonald's, and I started out at Leo Burnett in Chicago back in the late 80s, and I know that McDonald's told Leo Burnett, you need to make sure that the people on our team reflect our customer base. So as a result, you saw a lot more African Americans, a lot more people of color, a lot more women on that account. So we know that marketers can have that kind of influence and that kind of impact.
Yeah, and you mentioned too, Dr. Tucker, being a little frustrated with being passed over to HR, because, like you said, they're basically swamped. Their hands are tied in a lot of senses. Are you finding more companies being receptive to what you bring to them, to this? Not just the idea of diversity and inclusion, but actually doing it?
So what we have found is that those agencies, those organizations that have had what we call the egregious incidents, whether it's been, a sexual harassment suit, whether it has been some issue around race and ethnicity, that wakes them up quite significantly. So we find that while we have some folks that come to us proactively, we'll take them either way. But at the end of the day, what they trust about us is that we understand business operations. So they know that our consultants have deep backgrounds, both on the marketing side, the client side, as well as agency side. They know that we understand their business. So they trust us, we're credible, and they know that we are able to integrate inclusion management into the operations that will help them create a richer talent portfolio, minimize cultural homogeneity, and get the benefits of that, which is greater creativity, greater innovation, and ultimately greater growth.
Yeah, and Dr. Tucker, people, again, talk about diversity and inclusion. to you, Dr. Tucker, to do what matters, what does real diversity and inclusion look like?
Well, I try to practice what I preach, and we have a team of about 9 folks. We're small business, but it's really interesting because if you were to see our Zoom calls, you would see, we have contractors, as well as employees. But when we all get together, I mean, you will see they're both young. We have 20 somethings all the way to people in their 60s. We also have, white people. We have Black people. We have Hispanics. We, one of my most trusted advisors is actually a white male conservative, and it's really important to have him on our business because we have to bring everybody along. We have to make sure that we minimize resistance. We make sure that everybody's inclusive, and inclusion is more than about race and ethnicity and gender. It's also about making sure that everybody in the organization, regardless of their backgrounds, feel that they are part of the mission of the company. And so, I make sure that I include all the voices on my team to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing what matters, and that I can, really bring everybody along in the agency and make sure that everybody has the potential to have the best career of their lives.
Yeah, and Dr. Tucker, our producer sent me a great question. She says to ask you what advice you'd give folks who are experiencing the brunt of the lack of inclusion at the organizations. How do they sustain?
Well, I think, what I've been really fascinated by is how Gen Z, you talked about the young brother beforehand, King, and what he's doing to create solutions. And I'm really fascinated by, Gen Z and the younger millennials who just aren't taking it anymore. They're just, I remember back when I was their age, I felt lucky enough to be in advertising. I put up with a lot of stuff. They're not doing that anymore. And I think, despite COVID, despite what's happened in the economy, the world is wide open for people willing to put the hustle on. And I will tell you, there are a lot of young brothers and sisters out there that are creating their own thing. They are, it's become so easy now to create your own thing whether it's through video, through TikTok, through Instagram, marketing your own thing. So go at it. Even if you want a corporate job, go at it as if you have another alternative. Have those conversations where you make sure that your supervisors know that you have another alternative. It's a mindset, and that mindset makes sure that you retain that personal power to make decisions that are best for your career, and then have the bravery to go up to a supervisor and say, here's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about my career path. I want to talk explicitly about what it takes to do my job and to be successful, what it takes to do the next job and get that promotion. And if people aren't going to be open with you and specific, if they're intimidated by that, let me tell you, I am finding that there are a ton of other jobs, especially in advertising and marketing communication. Make sure you reach out to me, because there are people reaching out to me all the time that are willing to build inclusive environments and are looking to hire.
Wow. And Dr. Tucker, can you talk about a way in which companies can leverage the rise of these employee activists for mutual gain?
Yes. One of our biggest recommendations, it's not even a recommendation, it is an imperative, is that we make sure first that the C-suite puts talent back into the center of their activity. We tell every CEO, your biggest job isn't growth, which is what they like to say. My biggest job is to generate growth. Now, your biggest job is to hire great people. Those people will generate your growth. So, hiring great talent is your number one job. And so, and then taking care of that talent, nurturing that talent, investing in that talent, and enriching your talent portfolio. So, part of employee activism is listening to that talent, because that talent may be able to inform you of situations that are on the ground outside of the agency, that someone, when you're in the C-suite, you're at a level that oftentimes that's your biggest blind spot, is not seeing what's coming from the streets. So your employees can be a great source of intel, source of ideas. And this requires you as a C-suite person to give up a little bit of that I know everything power, and really create not just employee resource groups, but that employee resource leadership can be your advisory council. And we have also recommended that you need to hire a chief talent officer, not just an HR department, but a chief talent officer whose primary job is to help articulate employee expectations and employee ideas, make sure they're representing that in the C-suite all the time, so that you can leverage that activism, leverage that insight that those employees can bring to the table.
Wow. Dr. Chavis, I'm going to throw it to you for your closing thoughts.
Well, we want to thank Dr. Tucker for her experience and for her wisdom and for her advice. I agree with her that the pendulum is swinging now in the right direction, but there are so many opportunities out there that we need to take advantage of as a people. I just want to close the question to you, Dr. Tucker. We represent 230 African-American owned businesses, some medium-sized, some small size, like your business. What is the future of Black-owned advertising agencies? As you know, Dr. Tucker, 20, 30 years ago, there were dozens and dozens of Black-owned advertising agencies. Now, very few. And the ones that are still left only mainly do creatives. They don't really place the ads. The big advertising agencies place the ads. So how can we change that dynamic so we can have a rebirth of Black-owned advertising agencies?
It's an interesting world in advertising, because it's one of the few, and I hate to use this word, but I will, where where the businesses tend to be ghettoized in terms of what they produce. So here's what I'm going to say. I think there's some great Black-owned agencies that have been marginalized into just targeting Black consumers. But what we need to understand is that Black consumers are now part of a growing multicultural base of consumers that are becoming increasingly important, have a lot of money to spend. And they actually, having worked at Burrell, which is one of the largest Black-owned agencies, I can tell you that they are one of the most inclusive agencies I've ever been a part of. And in fact, I would argue that most Black-owned agencies are more inclusive than their counterparts in the industry. So I would urge national advertisers, if you're looking for an inclusive agency with great ideas, you need to start looking at Black-owned agencies and start giving them your main accounts. Don't just use them for targeting the Black community, because I will tell you, they have the skills, the creativity, the innovation that are really connecting more with this multicultural and global audience than the traditional, what they call general market agencies. So I think, from a standpoint of Black-owned agencies, don't limit yourself when you're pitching business to just targeted accounts. Go out and start having conversations with consultants and make sure they're presenting you to marketers for their entire business, not just the targeted businesses.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Lauren Tucker of Do What Matters, we really appreciate you dropping in this morning. Real quick, how can people access Do What Matters? Is there a website?
There's a website. It's letsdowhatmatters.com. And our email address is info@letsdowhatmatters.com.
Well, thanks again, Dr. Lauren Tucker. And it is National Internship Awareness Month. During the month of April, National Internship Awareness Month sets out to dispel many of the myths surrounding internships. Internships offer a great way to teach and share information with a person who's ready to start their career. Employers that offer internships find it a low risk, cost-effective workforce solution, often leading to a permanent hire. In fact, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's internship programs prepare college students and young professionals to become principal leaders, skilled policy analysis, and informed advocates by exposing them to the process that develop national policies and implement them from Capitol Hill to federal field offices. Program participants receive housing, a stipend, office placements, and opportunities to meet and interact with professional legislators and leaders working in all branches of government. Additionally, CBCF's interns are eligible for scholarships for prestigious public policy graduate programs such as the University of California, Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy and UC Hastings College of Law. And they are actively recruited by executive branch agencies such as the U.S. State Department and the Office of Management and Budget. This month, interns are encouraged to apply at the CBCF at www.cbcfinc.org/internships. So that's again, www.cbcfinc.org/internships. Interns are extremely valuable. Let it be known, the only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be. We will see you tomorrow. Thanks for joining us.